Hello and welcome to our interview series on technology impact assessment. This interview is part of the project on the Australia-India Joint Impact Assessment of Critical Technologies for Peace and Stability, funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, that has been ongoing since November 2024. Today gives me great pleasure to welcome Nate Kinch. Hello, Nate.
Hey Kat, how are you?
I'm really well. Now, it says here on your LinkedIn bio that you're an action philosopher, and I actually think we're seeing it play out right in front of us. You
I'm
also,
out in the real world.
oh, wow. Do,
Crazy.
do philosophers do that, do they?
Never, but this is a little secret we are allowed to.
So if I continue here, it talks about operationalizing AI ethics and that
Mhm.
you love diverse philosophical praxis to build products and services, allowing people to thrive by doing good. Tell us about that.
Um, well, as we discussed just a moment ago, there's been so many different ways I've attempted to frame the work that I do, and they're always approximations, reductions, they're always incomplete. And the way that I'm trying to frame it now, I'm trying to balance kind of like different modes. Like one is sort of like accessibility and relatability. Another is sort of like truthfulness or rigor, like what is it that I'm actually doing and going close towards describing that. And then another is just sort of like an authentic expression, like, using my own words. Not that I came up with any of those words, but to give that a crack. The action philosophy is sort of, my understanding is that the history there is really that it's sort of like it's a way of looking at like philosophical practice, and relates to the way that we've described action research over the last few decades. And there's not many folks that I know that describe themselves as action philosophers, but I'm very excited to see a bunch more because you know you can't avoid philosophy. Everyone has a philosophy, everyone has a worldview, everyone has beliefs about what is real, what can be known, what matters, how they should act. Um, but not all philosophies are created equal. And so, what we want to do is explicate where relevant and do the kind of work and live the process, and become enlivened through the process of refining and enhancing and deconstructing and reconstructing and reflecting on our philosophy so that it supports us in living, a healthy, happy, wholesome life, and it contributes to the greater whole that we're all part of. And I've had the privilege of being able to do that in a lot of different contexts. So I feel very grateful for that.
Yes, we've seen it in so many of your former startups and most recently with Trustworthy by Design, where you've done some consulting. Uh, Interestingly, we've had three philosophers on this week, and it must be the
Oh,
Philosophers
poor
Week.
you.
Yeah, well, one of them was steeped in the idea of value, going back to Aristotle. Another
Yep.
was looking at the integration of ethics and so many other domains that seem to be siloed. And the other this morning was saying how much it was important that philosophers are just not thinkers, but that we meet this topic of technology impact assessment in a practical way. And I think you're the perfect person to go from that foundation skill set to the integration to the actual. Now, this is what philosophy has to do with technology impact assessment. But I don't want to take the words out of your mouth. What does TIA have to do with your work?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I do lots of different types of impact assessments in my work, and I would say that they're sort of typically like they would be TIA adjacent or TIA complementary, or there's different ways that we could describe that. So I'll do sort of like different forms of impact assessments, but I'm typically looking at say maybe different drivers or through different lenses. Like I actually developed a particular approach to impact mapping that looks at sort of like the spectrum of consequences that may arise from a given socio-technical system using very wide boundary thinking. So we're not just looking at first degree or first order sort of effects, but um, nth order effects, if you will, looking at kind of like the magnitude of those effects, the likelihood of those effects, and then guiding folks through a process to apply amplification tactics to the potential positive effects and mitigation tactics to the potential negative effects, and then using that in conjunction with other sort of like applied ethics approaches. The work that I'm doing at the moment is sort of applied AI ethics work. And we have I'm doing sort of consulting work to a government agency there, Kat, and we have quite a rigorous approach to AI governance and AI assurance. And there are a number of different impact assessments that part of these sort of like end-to-end processes, or the life cycle of a socio-technical system. Human right impact assessments, the impact assessment that I just described before,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a few others from different sort of domains or business areas. So yeah, I would say that I'm complementary or adjacent to what we would traditionally think of as a TIA. And I think that one of the things that is really important in all of these processes, and you and I have talked a lot about this in the past, is ensuring that there's diverse sort of participation and representation throughout these processes. And that doesn't just mean, say, cultural or linguistic or whatever it may be diversity. It's also diversity of thought, diversity of sort of like mental models, and the intellectual lineages that we sort of come from. So yeah, I hope that's helpful to start with. I'm going to put myself on mute whilst you're talking, and I'm not, because I'm at a really busy road right now.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. Sounds good to me. And I'm going to ponder on a few things. I'm looking to my side because I've been
Yeah,
engaged
cool.
in a consultancy recently regarding certification. And very interestingly, we talk about the positives and negatives, as you just said. And often technology impact assessments have identified risks or harms that need mitigation strategies, uh, but we don't so much focus on those positive realizations, those benefits, those things that, as you said beautifully, should be amplified. And I do wonder why the majority of TIAs identify, for the greater part, problems than opportunities, and whether in your experience this may be shifting, or is it more towards when we're operationalizing over time, you should see less number of negatives and a greater number of positives emerge? How does that work in your mind?
Well, yeah, that's actually a really great question. So the first thing I'll say is so when I'm doing applied ethics, I'm sort of doing it in a relatively pluralistic way, which for the sake of today basically just means I don't put any one moral or ethical theory necessarily on a pedestal. I'm attempting to hold them in productive tension. So I'm looking through a rights lens, a justice lens, a common good lens, a care lens, a virtue lens, a consequentialist lens, etc.
Hmm.
And when we talk about uh, TIAs or any other related impact assessment, we are looking at it through a sort of utilitarian lens predominantly, even though an impact could be an effect on rights or an effect on dignity or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So it could affect, real world impacts or implications on instrumental or non-instrumental values. So I just wanted to sort of call that out. And like one of the things that I sort of prioritize in the work that I do in this space is like teasing that stuff out as best we can. And a lot of folks don't realize that there's a big difference between tension in instrumental values versus tension in non-instrumental values. A tension in instrumental values in sort of formal parlance doesn't necessarily mean we've arrived at a moral or ethical dilemma, because that word is used quite specifically in moral philosophy. But when we are confronted, and that's probably the appropriate frame, with a situation where non-instrumental values are in direct sort of opposition, we are sort of at somewhat of an impasse, and the sort of like rigor and integrity of work that has to be put in to move through such a process. It doesn't mean that we can't move through such a process, but it sort of goes from here to up here. So what I noticed, Kat, is depending on who is leading the TIA/equivalent, we see more or less positivity/negativity bias. So often if it's sort of like engineers leading, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here, right? Um, they typically have awesome intentions
Yeah.
and they're wicked smart in lots of different ways, but sometimes there's a narrowness to their thinking, their
Mm.
consequential thinking. And so they really focus in on the positive. This is going to be amazing. Look how awesome this technology is. And they're partly right. Um, but if you have, I don't know, a lawyer or someone that formally does kind of like organizational risk or technology risk or organizational governance or technology governance, that's often framed in the negative. And so they tend to apply more of a negativity bias. Part of my job is to sort of step back. You know how we see in footy, the coach is at the top of the sort of grandstand, not down on the ground with the players like you have in basketball or something like that. I try and take that view if I can, to
Mm.
to whatever extent I'm able to, and provide a little bit of a bird's eye view and help folks. I suppose a big part of my role is sort of um, facilitation and also working with perspectivism, because there's so many different perspectives that feature in these processes.
Yes.
Um, and that's not to say that they're all equally valid, but everyone deserves voice that participates in this perspective. And then we have to work together collaboratively to sort of decide how different perspectives will be held in productive tension, which might be more like weighted more heavily or less heavily, which might be promoted or demoted. So I think it really depends. And then one of the things that I try and do in the impact mapping approach that I've developed, Kat, is if we are in one of the camps a little bit more than the other, is really sort of slow down and shift the context and try and orient folks to, I'm pretty sure I can go here, and try and orient folks to that other perspective that they may be missing out on a little bit. And look, I find if we have, again, diverse enough representation and sort of like big D diversity, as in like diversity of thought, diversity of language, diversity of ethnicity, diversity, you know what I mean?
Yes.
We're less likely to be super oriented to one way over the other.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the stuff that, say, you or I might miss if we were just doing it individually or in a very small group is often teased out or explicated quite quickly and relatively upfront. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
It is. I think representation in technology impact assessments and participation is very important. If I said to you, what does joint technology impact assessment mean to you?
I would say that joint in like following on from the uh, train of thought previously would largely refer to sort of like the ownership, accountability, responsibility, etc., of those participating in the process. Um, often when we're in an organization, there's kind of like, oh, this area leads this, that area leads that. And we try and very explicitly delineate responsibilities until things get difficult. And then, no, no, but it was them. Um, that's all too common. But yeah, so joint to me would probably mean something like uh, a more equal, maybe not completely, but a more equal um, kind of like level of commitment, ownership, um, accountability, autonomy, et cetera, amongst the participants that are actively engaged in that process. And participants could extend beyond individuals and include, say, groups or teams or functional business units or whatever it may be. And that could go up to a responsible officer in a
Hmm.
in an organizational hierarchy or responsible officers. That would probably be how I would interpret that. Um,
And if we
yeah.
take this as you said, it would depend on the context a moment ago. If we took this across the shores in bilateral setups between
Okay.
countries at the macro level or
Yeah.
intergovernmental level, uh, what how would a joint technology impact assessment work in that context possibly?
Yeah, what a great question. Intergovernmental cooperation, don't be ridiculous. Um, so wouldn't it be great if we saw more of that? So yeah, so what could that mean? Well, look, at a sort of a relatively abstract kind of conceptual level, I'm happy to talk through it, and I'm pretty confident we could figure it out if we were given an explicit context as well. But so let's say we're talking about the nation states of Australia and India here. Um, what I would be wanting to see is, and I'm also assuming that there's some type of joint socio-technical development or whatever it is
Yes,
that is being done, right? There's agreement, hey, we want to do something together. So we first have to establish sort of shared aims. Um,
yes.
Once we've kind of established shared aims, based on the purpose and the directionality of our aim or our goal, we're hopefully going to start being reasonably thoughtful about, well, who needs to be involved in order to do this well, right? In fact, let's not just have some sort of highbrow folks defining what the goal is. Let's actually step back for a moment and be a little bit more deliberative about who participates in defining the goal. Does it
Mm,
actually represent the interests of the unique and diverse peoples of our respective nations? If so, at what level, in what context? There's stuff there that would probably like I'm painting a bit of a panacea here because this probably often doesn't get done this way. But anyways, we may as well dream big. Um, and then from that basis, start establishing, a more uh, explicitly designed sort of team of formal
mhm.
contributors. And I would
Yes.
do this sort of with some kind of concentric circles. You might have core teams, and then outside of that, you have folks that participate with a little bit sort of less density or involvement.
Mhm.
Um, we're both big on and participatory design. These things are really important, particularly for public benefit initiatives. Like if you're not doing that for public benefit initiatives, you're really falling short of, I think, some basic expectations. Um, and then as part of that process, you're going to engage in lots of different activities, workflows, etc. And one of them, hopefully, is some type of TIA or TIA-like activity, so that we are taking some time up front to deeply consider the wide boundary implications of what we're doing. And hopefully you would have folks involved in that process who are able to call out the kind of like unchecked or unquestioned assumptions. Um, I'll give you an explicit example, Kat. So, you know, I'm not sure if you're, you probably are, but maybe some of the listeners aren't. The history of
Yes.
GDP as a metric, it was never intended to be used the way that we use it now. And there's a heck of a lot of literature, um, and I sort of buy into a lot of this literature, frankly, Kat, that suggests this is a grossly inadequate metric for the prosperity of a nation state,
Mm,
recognizing what that really means. It's
mm.
the peoples, it's the ecology. Like, look where I am. I'm walking along the
Beautiful.
Birrarung right now, um, which is a sacred place, to the first peoples of this part of the world. Um, and we actually have projects at the moment to sort of make the Birrarung swimmable again, which is a huge endeavor because it's so far from being swimmable right now in these sort of areas. It's crazy. Yeah, I,
Wouldn't that be amazing?
it
Honestly.
would. I realize I'm covering a lot of ground here, but so yeah, so as part of the TIA, just going back to that, or TIA like process, the joint TIA like process, what I would be wanting to see is oh, look at this little water dragon just here.
Hmm.
What I would be wanting to see is, oh, doggy went for it. What I would be wanting to see is, yeah, folks that are willing to challenge the kind of like assumed premises or assumed values. So how everything, like all the AI rhetoric in our nation state, oh, productivity or productivity or productivity, productivity equals economic gain. Um, and that sounds good, right? A lot of people are like, yeah, we want more productivity. We want more money. Awesome. Um, it's a very naive perspective. It's a
Yes.
very, very naive perspective. Now, I'm not saying productivity equals bad. No, 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 no. right? But we have to situate what we and we have to specify what we mean by productivity as well. We have to situate that in a wider boundary perspective, because every time we intervene in a system, there are various different consequences along a spectrum from the very best to the very worst. Um, and if we are explicitly doing something to, and this is the other thing with AI, like these guaranteed costs, all of the benefits are speculative right now. I won't get into that, but so I would want to see people involved that are questioning that stuff. And I don't mean to just annoy the folks in the process. I mean to be rigorous and integrous and honest about what we're really trying to do. Again, if it's two nation states coming together in the
Hmm.
spirit of intergovernmental cooperation, thinking about what is the government supposed to do, right? Create a sort of governance scaffold for the nation to ideally enhance wide boundary prosperity of whatever the boundaries of that nation state are. That's the type of thing that I would want to see in the process. Um, and then I would want to see for processes like that, I would want to see genuine accountability. I would want to see contestability, et cetera, et cetera. Um, because very often, and we see too many situations like this around the world, people are involved in big decisions, and often those decisions are upon post sort of hoc reflection, very poorly made. The inputs into the process are horribly incomplete. They're always going to be incomplete, but we can make them less incomplete. Um, and there's often no consequences. So we want to see that there are actual consequences for um, the process and how it plays out. And I'm not trying to like wave the stick at people here necessarily. But I'm thinking of the different forms of justice and actually seeing them play out.
You're very right regarding that the goal would need to be shared. It would have to be, in the case of the technology impact assessment, some shared technology endeavor that would benefit, hopefully, both nations, whether
Mm,
that's, in the case of Australia and India, very much a public idea of submarine cables and their use for positive surveillance monitoring to support security of each nation,
mm, yeah,
or other technologies for peace and stability. But the question then becomes, what are these shared
yeah,
technologies in
yeah.
joint impact assessment? And in the context of peace and stability, how could a TIA help? What is the role of a TIA to ensure or enhance peace and stability?
Yeah, that's a look. These are beyond my usual areas of sort of practical scholarship, but I'll have a crack. um, so first of all, what do we mean by peace and stability?
Hmm.
Like that would be my first question if I was asked if I was brought into a process like this. Okay,
Yes.
great. Like now, like don't just assume. What do we mean by peace and stability? What does it mean in this context? What does it mean given the historicity of not just our nation states, but the idea of nation states in general? What does it mean in the context of the historicity of our species? What does peace and stability mean in the current geopolitical environment? What does peace and stability mean? And guess what? I'll give you an example. We ain't going to have stability from a biospheric standpoint, Kat, because we've exited the Holocene, right? Things are getting more volatile. And,
Mm.
we've now transgressed 7 of 9 planetary boundaries. So from a very wide boundary environmental standpoint, we're going to have less stability than we've been so fortunate to rely on in the past. But what that's going to require is more sort of like adaptive resilience at the level of our governance structures. Because when times are great, there can be a little bit of sort of like
Yes.
looseness, there can be more mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but when times are really tough, the glue that binds us, that enables us to work healthily with difference, that enables us to move towards difficulty and adapt through the process of courageously interfacing with it. together, not alone. Um, so I would be wanting to understand those types of things. And then
Yes.
if we became clearer about those deep but very fundamental, seemingly simple but actually very challenging questions to answer, then I would be looking at, all right, now we have a sense of the landscape, the context within which we're operating. Now we can start looking at, all right, what do healthy shared aims look like in that context?
Mm-hmm.
What do our nation states respectively have to uniquely and proportionately contribute to those aims? How might we work towards bringing them about? And then within that context, start looking to deploy ATIA or TIAs um, to give us both a wider and a deeper sense of how specific initiatives might impact not just the explicit aims, but the nth order stuff that again is so often externalized in everything that we do in our economic models, etc. Um, that's maybe I'm not sure if that's a direct answer, but that's more a
It is a
processual
direct.
answer. Yeah.
It is a direct answer. We've had a number of experts that used to work for the Office of Technology and Assessment in the States say to us the historical element is huge.
Mm,
The geopolitical element, is huge, especially when the outcomes of a TIA are handed to a government agency. So
yes.
the role of the Office of Technology Assessment was to inform Congress. So it
Mm,
was like they were the audience. And so history and historical elements and the geopolitics were very important. All those elements that you mentioned. Uh, where do you see today, either at the local level, the meso or macro level, where does a technology impact assessment live, and by
mm.
whom should it be conducted, and for what reason?
That's a great question as well, Kat. I think it's sort of like it's somewhat heterarchical um, in structure. So, or holonic, there's different ways that we could describe it. Um, nested relationships, maybe, and
Mm-hmm.
and represented in different ways at different levels. So, I think that, and I actually, with one of our mutual friends, Matt Mitker, and some other colleagues, this is brings me back to a couple of years ago, the DISA, Department of Industry, um, Science and Resources, published their 10-year sort of priorities
Yes.
for science and research, and we responded to that and anyways, we never got a response to our response, but I think it was very interesting. um, and we were sort of talking about this socio-technical architecture that works in this heterarchical way. Um, and I think I would consider something like that. So I would want to see um, different levels of contribution, different levels of ownership, different levels of accountability, different levels of responsibility, etc., um, represented at these different levels. And like thoughtfully and sort of like appropriately represented. So, like if you're implementing a technology within a specific bioregion and you don't understand the context of that bioregion, its culture, its biodiversity, etc., it's going to be very hard to do a TIA well.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's the type of technology that extends beyond the bioregion, well, you also need to go beyond the bioregion. So you might need to look at a state or the entire, geography of a nation state, or even across geographical borders, because these are just maps that we've drawn over time, right? I hope that's not too offensive for anyone, but that is the truth. I don't
Yes.
think you take an astronaut that has this sort of overview effect, and they're looking at the Earth. They don't see the border. They just see this massive continent. They
Correct.
see that this incredible interconnected living system. Anyways, push that to the side for a moment. So yeah, so I would want to see the TIA playing out at the different levels, and I would want to see sort of like collaboration between the levels. I would want to see some type of socio-technical architecture that enables effective, not just like cooperation or collaboration, but sort of observation of how things are playing out at different levels as well. Um, so yeah, I don't think it necessarily belongs anywhere as a general rule. It depends on the initiative. In some
Yes.
cases, you may centralize aspects of, say, the governance of a given a socio-technical initiative that a TIA is directed towards at the sort of like the macro level.
Mm.
Maybe you even house it at the level of the UN. Who knows? And then it's gonna kind of depend. But I think what we often do, Kat, is we either have these hyperlocal initiatives and they never speak up, or we
Yes.
have these top-down, very paternal type initiatives that never get make their way meaningfully down. Um, and what we want is the bottom up, the top down, and the kind of like middle in and out. We kind of want all of that. And guess what? If we wisely use the socio-technical capabilities that we now have, we can do that stuff. It's not some abstract, mystical like idea. We can actually do that really well. It requires a bit of political will and a bit of know-how and a bit of patience and resilience, but we can do that stuff really well.
So that leads me on to my next question. Given your emphasis at the beginning of this conversation on the importance of action research,
Mm.
uh, and case studies and studying events and so forth, how do we gather evidence for technology impact assessments? Where do we find that data? Who do we ask? What does it look like?
This is really hard. So I was on a call with a scholar from the University of Bonn yesterday, Kat Sophia Falk, who's doing some very influential work on the relationship between the materiality of AI supply chains and their impact on planetary boundaries. And
Hmm.
I would say she's doing some of the most important work in that space. And so I've been very grateful for her contributions because I use it in my sort of applied ecological ethics work as directed towards socio-technical development and use, is particularly AI in this case.
Yes.
And particularly we're talking about language models because they're very different to narrower forms of AI in terms of their materiality, their resource consumption, etc. So, there are many challenges associated with that type of stuff because arguably companies are actually being less transparent about their disclosures than they were in recent years, and there's a number of
Hmm.
reasons for that. Not going to throw any particular political movements under the bus, but let's just say there are influences that are encouraging that. Um, and there's some nation states in particular that are really discouraging environmental progress. Um, so there are difficulties because we have a lot of data or information limitations, Kat. So um, but we still have to pragmatically move forward, and we have to do the best job we can possibly do with the constraints that we face. So the general answer is we have to look everywhere and anywhere that seems deeply relevant to the wide boundary implications of what we're proposing to do. Um, and if we have good quality data, great. We can rely on it with reasonable confidence.
Hmm.
Never perfect confidence, but reasonable confidence. If we don't have a lot of data, we don't just throw our hands in the air and go, oh, too hard, let's not do it. You might develop something like heuristics. And Sophia and I sort of talked about this last night. Um, so, because let's say in the context of materiality of AI, and this, an interesting for folks, that like you could go back to Kate Crawford's work in
Yes.
2018 on the anatomy of an
Yes.
AI system, which was Amazon Echo, very different to what we're talking about now, but a
Mm.
wonderfully visualized articulation of the materiality, the end-to-end materiality of that particular system. And we've had recent updates as a group, I think, somewhere in Spain that have done a recent update and very drawn inspiration from Crawford's work. To visually represent, the materiality of like a language model. Um, it's funny, isn't it? Because the way we talk about it, language model, and it feels very abstract, but it's an inherently material process. It's like
Yes.
yeah, math plus materials is basically what So it's so then what we do when we have imperfect or incomplete or no data at all we have to sort of develop heuristics, and those heuristics are going to be well, ideally very context specific, fit for purpose, etc. So it's going to depend. But let's just say we use the example of a language model. And let's say, so in Australia, we have 8 AI ethics principles that were first published in 2019 by DISA, CSIRO, etc. DISA sort of houses them, or National AI Center kind of houses them now. Um, that was based on the work from IEEE. 700 folks came together to publish something called Ethically Aligned Design 2 years before that. And I think, kudos to our government, because that was a good body of work to rely upon
Hmm.
as the core sort of reference for our eight AI ethics principles. I'm saying that so often now that I'm getting a little tongue tied. Um, and the first principle, and the way that they're structured, so there's a value and then there's a principle. So the value describes what matters, what's important. The principle is enactive. It's a verb, if you will. It's driving us towards action. So the first principle is basically the first value, excuse me, is like individual, societal, and environmental well-being, and then the principle is, AI systems should yada yada yada. Um, Now, in order to do that, what we have to do is we have to try and get a sense of, okay, well, like what are the material implications, our material implications, both direct and indirect, of this particular thing, right? And then
Yes.
you got to actually like do the hard work, and source the data. And then you're going to realize, oh, we don't have as much data as we would like. This is really challenging. So then you have to go, all right, what do we know? What don't we know? Um, what are the types of decisions that we can make? Okay, well, we could select smaller models. That's a really great heuristic. It's gonna lower the environmental impact, even if we can't like accurately, like usefully approximate it, like accurately quantify it. Okay,
Mm.
what else can we do? Or we can offer training and best practice guidelines and stuff like this, because a complex prompt is more energy, water, etc. intensive than a simple prompt, right? So you can teach like, right. So we start we start going, all right, well, we can't map this perfectly, but gosh, we can do a decent job of massively reducing the impact, um, by doing the following things. And that's the type of approach that I would like to see. Sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes you've got to just face that difficulty, like bang your head against the wall, like, I'm not, and then like go beyond that, embrace the tragedy for a moment, and then become post tragic and continue doing the work, because like,
Yep,
we have to. We don't have a choice. We've got
that's
to we've
right.
got to keep going, and we've got to try and do better. But keeping going doesn't mean sort of keep calm and carry on as if nothing's a problem. There's lots of problems.
Yeah.
Interface with the problems. Grieve for the problems if you have to. You should, in fact.
Mm.
Feel. We're not brains in a vat. We're embodied beings. Like the leading theory in the philosophy of cognitive
Exactly.
science is 4E-cogsi. Cognition does not occur exclusively in the head.
That's
It is
right.
very, it's variously embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended. So like feel your, like all these things are valid. And then after you've felt, some deep breaths, come back to the work, and we continue.
I love that response. I love that you've taken us on this beautiful journey this afternoon, looking at the Victorian backdrop for folks who
Yeah.
who are unaware of it. That's what it looks like when you have your feet on the ground, and it brings realism, actually, Nathan, to everything you're saying. And it goes back to the original thoughts you had on rigor, authenticity, relatedness, and what it means to be real. Um, I want to uh, talk very briefly, a few minutes perhaps, on
Mhm.
what are critical and emerging technologies to you? What does it
Yeah.
mean? And if a country comes up with a list of top 10, why does it do that? And what does it mean for everyone in that nation?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Like I'm also the philosopher in residence, CAD at a place called Colabs, which is sort
Mm-hmm.
of like a biotech innovation hub here in, well, we've got two of them in Melbourne now, and the first one in Sydney is being built. So it's really exciting. Like this transdisciplinary innovation hub, and there's lots of very interesting stuff going on in there. With that said, I wouldn't claim for even a second that this is the core of my expertise. I would say it's sort of something that I've dabbled in and worked around and contributed to, but I just want to sort of frame that. Critical, like let's just approximate that to like very important, very consequential, likely to be very impactful, maybe for good, maybe for bad, and it's going to depend on lots of different factors. And emerging, like I'm not going to get into technical
Mm-hmm.
definitions of emergence as a phenomena, that still remains perplexing to those that study it in the complexity sciences and whatnot. Um, uh, so yeah, it's something that is coming, into being. Um, and why does it matter? Well, this stuff's happening, so we can't just be passive observers. And we can't just act as if there aren't bad actors, because unfortunately there are. Now, it's not as simple as the good guys and the bad guys, and anyone that suggests it is absolutely kidding themselves. Even Marvel, like movies, don't pitch it that simply anymore, right? There's
Yeah.
nuance, and
Yeah.
there's way more nuance in the real world. But these, we have like, so what is so I've done a bit of applied philosophical work on sort of existential and catastrophic risk over the years, and what's sort of like the meta existential risk? Maybe this is where we leave it. Well, it's the gap between our power and our wisdom. We're incredibly powerful. We can end all life on the earth. Like we have that capacity, end all life, or the possibility of all life on this planet. Um, but we lack the wisdom to steward this power. Um,
Mm.
and so that's why it matters, because we could destroy ourselves. And actually, we're on a pretty bad trajectory in a lot of ways. So becoming familiar with what's happening is really important. Applying sort of like a wisdom scaffold, whatever that means, we're not going to have time to get into it, to those processes is really important. It's particularly important for genuinely cooperative endeavors, because otherwise we end up in multipolar traps. We end up in arms races. That's what's happening with AI right now. And this is one of the key drivers of what's referred to as the meta crisis, the sum total of our interconnected and interdependent ecosystem of crises, along with their underlying drivers. Um, so yeah, like that's why it matters, because life matters. Life is amazing. It's stunning to have the opportunity to be alive, to have experience, to be able to reflect on experience, to be able to fall in love, to be able to care for those that we love, to be cared for in our times of need. And we ought not destroy that possibility.
Nathan Kinch of Australia, thank you so much for spending your afternoon stroll with us. Thank you for everything you've contributed, both in the past and now, on these topics. You are a wise person, and we look forward to seeing your future pan out in this space and seeing some amazing headway into the operationalization of AI ethics in particular. Thanks so much, Nate.
Thank you, Kat.